Hello everybody. We're going to be taking notes today on section 7-3. 7-3 is a really long section we're going to be spending quite a few days on and be doing at least one lab on. So let's just take some basic notes on this. Let me give you a minute to write down the title. And you guys have all the vocabulary already written down. I'll come around and check that for you. But for right now, let's write down some details of the beginning parts of section 7-3. Talks mainly about the cell membrane and how you get into a cell or how you get out of a cell. Alright, I'm going to give you time to write this, so don't scramble to write. First of all, write down that top bullet. All cells are surrounded by a cell membrane. There has never been a cell discovered that doesn't have a cell membrane. So bacterial cells have them, our cells have them, you guys know plant cells have them, fungus, protist, every cell has a cell membrane, and you guys already have that second definition there. Every cell has to be able to control what gets in and what gets out. If it can't do that, the cell dies. If you look down below, some cells have a cell wall. You guys already have that little definition there. It's a strong supporting layer. It gives protection, or talk about what it gives protection against, and it also gives support. And I want you to write that second bullet underneath cell wall. It's found in plants, fungi have them, bacteria have them. These creatures called archaea, which we'll talk about more so in the spring when we start talking about bacteria, and some of these single-celled creatures called protists, a lot of things that live in ponds and things like that, they have cell walls too. We don't have cell walls. Animals don't have them. If we had cell walls, we wouldn't be able to move. But remember, we do have a cell membrane. Okay, let's talk more about what the cell membrane is made out of. Here's a picture. If you took like one little section out of a cell membrane, as you can see, there's lots of things going on in here. It looks really strange, and we're going to talk about what these different pieces are, how they all work together to control what gets in and what gets out, and let your cell do some different things. Okay. So our title here is just the cell membrane. You need to write down that top bullet. The cell membrane is a double layered sheet that can be called a lipid bilayer. Okay, you all know that bi means two. So the cell membrane is actually a two-layered sheet, and it's made out of lipids. You all know that lipids, I don't know if you need to write that middle bullet. If you forgot that, write it down. But a lipid is one of those 4 macromolecules, and it's the fats, the oils, the waxes. So your cell membrane is actually a fatty, oily consistency, and it's a double layer of that. And if you look at that very bottom bullet, I want you to write that down. Because our cell membranes are made out of lipids, it gives our cell membrane flexibility. So don't think of the cell membrane as made out of concrete, or I know in your Cell City projects a lot of you said it was like the walls or the doors or something like that. Our cell membrane is actually very flexible. It's about the consistency of olive oil, and it allows our cells to be flexible. And remember, it keeps your outside of your cell separate from the inside of your cell. So let me go back one slide just to show you this. If you look here, we have these little yellow balls with those green tails hanging down. That's one of the layers. Then if you look at the bottom, we have more yellow balls with those green tails hanging up. That's our second layer. So that's our 2-layer. We have a lipid bilayer, and all of those yellow balls with the green tails, those are the lipids, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. So again, from this slide, you had to have the first bullet. Make sure you know bilayer means 2 layers. If you forgot what a lipid was, you wrote down that middle bullet, and then you have to write down that bottom bullet. Flexibility. And it also protects the cell and separates it from the environment. Alright, let's talk more about what that cell membrane is made out of. I drew this, so it's easy enough for you guys to draw. Just make the title of this one phospholipids. You see that up top. The majority of the cell membrane, each of those layers, is made out of these things called phospholipids. And just draw a circle with two tails, kind of like a lollipop with two sticks. The top is a phosphate head. Phosphate is just the element phosphorus. We learned about the phosphorus cycle. We need that to make DNA. Well, part of the reason why you need to get phosphorus by eating things, and plants need to get phosphorus through their roots, is to make these phospholipids to make more cell membrane every time a cell needs to grow or every time you need to make more cells. So we have this circular part called a phosphate head, and then down below we have these two tails hanging down, and those are made out of lipid. So you guys know lipids don't like water. Water can't dissolve them. So let me be quiet for a minute so you guys can write that. I want you to write in one more thing that I don't have there. Okay. Next to phosphate head, I want you to write the word hydrophilic. That's HYDROPHILLIC. That means water loving. That means those phosphate heads, they're going to be facing the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell on each layer. And they can be around water. Okay, they're polar. Water can make bonds to them, all those things we learned about. Next to where it says lipid tails, I want you to write hydrophobic. So it's HYDROPHOBIC. That means water hating or water fearing, like a phobia. And those fatty acid tails are going to organize themselves towards the inside of the cell membrane, away from the watery environment and away from the watery cytoplasm. So our cell membrane has both features. Part of the cell membrane is polar, that's the phosphate head part, and part is nonpolar, that's the lipid fatty acid tail part, and that's going to give the cell membrane some unique abilities. Let me jump ahead here and show you that same picture again. Here we go. We have the phosphate heads, are all yellow balls, and then the lipid tails are the green parts hanging down inside. So what this is showing you, imagine the top part with all those yellow balls, that's facing the outside of your cell, and it's facing your blood. And then the bottom part of yellow balls, that's facing the inside of your cell, it's facing your cytoplasm. Well, those two yellow ball areas are hydrophilic. They make bonds to water, they can face water. But the inside, there is no water there. That is hydrophobic, because it's all made out of oily, waxy lipids. Alright, there's more than just phospholipids inside the cell membrane. So you already wrote down that top one. Phospholipids make up the majority of the membrane. Write down that second X there. Proteins. Proteins are found attached to our cell membrane, or they run up and down right through the cell membrane. We'll talk more about those tomorrow and into Monday. So you all know proteins made of amino acids. They do so many things for our bodies. We'll talk about what they do, but for right now, just know proteins can be found attached to or running through the cell membrane. And we also have some carbohydrates on our cell membranes. You all know carbs are just sugars. They end in the suffix OSE. Well, you got to write those two little plus signs underneath where it says carbohydrates. Carbohydrates attach to the proteins on the outside of the cell, and they let cells identify one another. So carbohydrates attach to the proteins on the outside of the cell, and they allow cells to identify one another. That's how your cells know what cells are you, so you don't attack your own cells. And it's also how your body knows if you have a sinus infection and you have bacteria that don't belong there. Bacteria have different carbohydrates on the outside of them. Our body sees them and realizes that's not us, and it attacks them. So we have phospholipids, proteins, and carbohydrates, and that's what makes up just about all of our cell membrane. I have one more molecule to tell you about. They just want to tell you about how certain things can get in and out of our cells. Alright, I want you to write cholesterol. Now if you think about it, our cell membrane is this waxy, oily consistency. I read before that's about the consistency of olive oil that you would cook with. Well, that's a little too flexible. So we have cholesterol that our body makes, and what it does is it's found in the cell membrane, and it functions to stiffen up the membrane. It makes it a little more rigid than an olive oil consistency. That way it can actually hold itself together. It can actually hold all those organelles you told me about inside the cell. It doesn't break very easily. You've heard of cholesterol, and maybe one of your parents has high cholesterol. Well, if cholesterol gets inside of your veins and arteries, that's bad. Okay, it makes your veins and arteries too stiff, and it can make your blood pressure go up. But it needs to be inside your cell membranes, because your cell membranes need to be stiffened up by it. And I want you to write down in the second bullet, the cell membrane can also be called the fluid mosaic model. So write down, the cell membrane can also be called the fluid mosaic model. That's how we understand the cell membrane to be. If you're an art person, you know a mosaic is when you make a picture out of lots of smaller pieces. Well, that's what the cell membrane is. It's this one thing made out of all these smaller pieces, phospholipids, with proteins, with cholesterol, with carbohydrates. Fluid means everything's sitting in this oily consistency, so things can actually move around. So fluid mosaic model is basically telling you cell membrane is made of lots of these other little parts, and things aren't cemented in place. They can move around in that waxy, oily consistency of all those phospholipids. So let's look at that picture that we've been looking at again, and I think by now you're going to understand it quite a bit better. Here we go. So, fluid mosaic. Yeah, this looks like a mosaic, like you would look at a picture made out of a whole bunch of little tiles or something like that. We have all these phospholipid molecules making up probably 80% of it. You have these red proteins shooting all the way through. There's that blue thing's called a glycoprotein. That just means a protein with a carb hooked onto it. You see those little stringy carbohydrates hanging off there. That's how cells recognize each other. This picture doesn't show you, but there'd be cholesterol molecules jammed in there to kind of stiffen it up so it's not quite as liquidy. So that's what you need to know about the cell membrane. Alright, one more thing about the cell membrane. We say the cell membrane is selectively permeable. Permeate means to get through. So that means things can get through. Selectively means it is able to decide which things get through and which things don't. So what you have to write down is selectively permeable allows some material to pass, like oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, things like that. But it prevents the passage of other materials, like your nucleus can't get out. Or really big things can't just get inside of your cells, like bacteria can't just go inside your cells. They stay outside your cells. So selectively permeable. Some things can get in, some things can't. And we're going to start learning about how does the cell membrane know. And let me spend about another minute and a half just giving you one way of how things can get in and how they can get out. Okay. There are two main ways things get into and out of cells. The first main way is called passive transport. You got to write down these two bullets. Passive transport. Remember, passive means you're just kind of sitting there, not really using any energy. Well, the cell does that too to transport things. So in passive transport, no energy is acquired from the cell, and molecules travel from where they're in a high concentration to where they're in a low concentration. So no energy from the cell. Molecules travel from where they are highly concentrated to where they are in a low concentration. Alright. Let me just show you a picture of passive transport here. If you look at this, they put some green food coloring inside of this beaker full of water. And then if you look in part B there, that's passive transport. The molecules were highly concentrated where they were all green, but they move around to spread out, and then all the way to the right in picture C, they're all evenly spread out. You think of like an air freshener. You spray it in one part of your room, passive transport will move it all over your room. That's what we're talking about. We're from high concentration to a low concentration.